Hello, everyone. Welcome to the show. I'm here today with a very special guest who I'll let introduce himself in a second here. But today we're going to be talking all about Bitcoin and diving deep into this world. Very excited to have Tim here. Tim, why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself? Tell us a little bit of your background.
Well, thanks, Vinny. Thanks for having me. My name's Tim Neimeyer. I am an elementary music teacher in Central Illinois, and I'm also a Bitcoiner. Musician, music teacher by day, Bitcoiner by night, I like to say. I've
Nice.
been in Bitcoin for 5 years. Before that, I did a bunch of investing and, learned to cut my teeth that way. But just since 2018, been all Bitcoin.
Nice. And I like the shirt you got there. Perfect.
Thank you.
And
Thank you.
so I guess how did you become interested in Bitcoin originally?
It's kind of a funny story. We always talk about you needing at least 2 or 3 touch points before you actually get into it. You got to hear about it, then you ignore it, then you hear about it again, and you're like, "What is that?" And then after the third touch point, you start to really dig in. My sister did pretty well in the 2017 run up, so that was my first touch point. And of all people, my father, who is now a retired farmer, who got me into investing in the first place. He's like, well, let's check out this Bitcoin thing. I'm like, okay. So I get into it and I start reading, and he's just wanting to buy and then buy everything else, all the cryptos. And I kind of dug in on learning about it. And once you fall down the rabbit hole, it's no turning back.
Yeah, I can definitely relate. So, Bitcoin. Why Bitcoin?
That is a huge question. There's so many ways to go with that. Um, for your audience, it'd probably be best to stick on the investing side of it. But just so you know, there's so many other things besides the number go up technology. There's so many societal benefits that come from it. The more you study, the more you start to see all of those. But to keep it simple, start simply investing. Um, I would probably turn around and say, why the dollar? Why fiat?
Great
The
question. It's
best reason.
not been good to us lately.
No, it hasn't. I mean, the greatest reason for it is because of its liquidity, right? It's the most used. It's the world's reserve currency, right? So right there, that's about its big talking point. But outside of that, what has it done for us? And you and I were talking before, and not many people pay attention to, but 40%, roughly 40% of all dollars in existence have been printed since COVID started. What's that do to the value of all the other dollars? Right? Simple supply and demand right there. So Bitcoin has a supply hard cap of 21 million. There will never be more than 21 million. It's written into the code. It is next to impossible to change. We can talk about that if you're interested. But so right there, knowing that you have a limited supply as demand is steady or increases, the value of that is just programmed to increase over time. Volatile, of course, but it's still a set supply, which no other thing on earth has ever been. Even gold, when the price of gold goes up, we can dig more gold. You know what I mean?
Right.
So
Yeah, and
got a disinflationary schedule. So right there, that's where you get that digital gold idea.
yeah, the digital
What were
gold
you gonna say?
idea was what definitely drew me to it. Kind of got involved during the frenzy, and we had discussed the other day. I held my crypto through Voyager Digital. Lots of mistakes and lessons learned there, but I always kind of viewed it as a very speculative holding and kept it a very small percentage of my portfolio. Luckily, because everything went under. I'm sure we'll get to all that later, but you brought up
Sure.
that frightening statistic of that there are now 40% more dollars in circulation than prior to COVID. And yeah, what that does to your purchasing power. I'm sure everyone is feeling it when they go to the supermarket these days. And all of a sudden, Bitcoin seems to have the potential to solve a lot of these problems. You had written inflationary fiat incentivizes its users to make decisions based on the needs of the present while disinflationary Bitcoin incentivizes its users to plan for the future while deprioritizing present consumption. What did you mean by that?
All right, so that gets into the more of the societal side of it. Once you buy and hold Bitcoin and start to learn about it, um, I, this is anecdotal, but I know a lot of Bitcoiners who feel this way, that your time preference changes. Instead of being a high time preference, I need stuff now. I'm going to spend, knowing that my dollar is going to be worth less and less. Now, knowing I have a fixed set of the pie, I'm going to be have a lower time preference. I'm going to be planning for the future because I know the share of value of the network that I am in is fixed, and I know over time with productivity gains and whatnot that its value is going to go up. So therefore, why spend it now? There's actually a website out there called I think the website is I don't know the language on your TV show, but I'm just gonna on your YouTube, but it's called Bitcoin or Shit, and known as Bitcoin or Stupid Shit. And you go in there and type anything you could have bought since 2008, and it shows you this is how much Bitcoin you could have had and how much you actually spent on a PS4 or whatever, a pair of shoes, and it just shows you that through that whole inflation and everything, if you would have held Bitcoin, you'd add a lot more.
Yeah,
But
we as
go ahead.
No, I was just say anything goes here. You're free to speak your mind, and I think you bring up a great point. I would love to get into that as well of the societal benefits, because I think we've got a huge problem with instant gratification right now, and we see it with investing, we see it with everything else. It's like pleasure, dopamine immediately, hard work not so much, light at the end of the tunnel not so much. It's all about just the present moment, and I think people are getting losing sight of that long-term perspective and how important it is. And that's one of the easiest ways to really build wealth is over time. So yeah, I think that's a very interesting topic. We could definitely explore more.
Yeah. I just wrote an article recently and kind of like touching on that and my views on that. And it seems like not only did we say fiat is increasing in size, but also how does it increase? Well, there's a centralized control of people, the central bank or whatever you want to get at, the government. They make those changes. Their moral set is now attached to the money because they get to change not only the supply, but the rules for how you interact with your money, right? So now we have this like paternal hierarchy of those that have the power telling those that do not have the power what to do. And what does that do? It makes them like subservient, right? They're not thinking for themselves. They're not making choices that might better themselves. They're just doing what is told. And I know I'm painting with a broad brush right here, but when you get on a Bitcoin standard, the only way to get Bitcoin besides buying it with fiat is to earn it. And the only way you can earn it is by providing a service for people. And if your service isn't good enough, you have to adapt, right? So therefore, it kind of forces people into a more of a self-sufficient mindset. And again, this is my take, but also what I grab from all Bitcoiners. We become way more self-sufficient. We don't worry about, it's not so much about doing what somebody says up here. It's about doing what's right, what's best for people. It's a voluntary network. So it's all about voluntary exchange as opposed to coercion and force, being told that you have to do this, or, we think for ourselves kind of thing.
Right.
You mentioned also, we talked about the 21 million and also the thing about fiat being the dollar or whatever going up in the supply. You also have to realize that that's erratic. It doesn't go up. I mean, now it's starting to go up in a straight line, because of all the money we spent, but they'll turn on the brakes. They have the interest rate changes. They have all of these little tools that they're tweaking all the time. And what does that actually do to the value? Like when we see a price of a stock go up or down, or the price of a house go up or down, that has nothing to do with the actual value of that item, of that good or service, right? It has everything to do with how they're changing the measuring stick of value. So a lot of people think Bitcoin's volatile, which it is compared to the dollar. But when you compare it in the network to itself, it's very stable, because here's a phrase that Bitcoiners use: one Bitcoin will always equal one Bitcoin, right? You can't say that about the dollar. The value of the dollar is going down by like 99% over the last 100 years, and it continues to. So what are you measuring, right? It's like if we're trying to, if we want our kids to get taller, all we're doing is changing the markers on the measuring stick, right? And that's what happens with all fiat, all government money, is because they're incentivized to do that. They're incentivized to print more, to pay off more people, make more debt. So to us, it's a more ethical system to be in a Bitcoin standard, to think and transact in Bitcoin. I don't know if I'm getting off track for you here, but
No, this is
just
all
kind
great
of,
stuff. And I think that's the perfect way to put it. It's like if you're measuring your kid's height and you're using inches, and then you decide to change to centimeters, you're going to have more centimeters and still be at the same height. And that's a great analogy for what happens with the dollar. In fact, it's actually far worse, obviously. But you bring up a really interesting point, and I know we had kind of touched on the other day with market appreciation and all these things. Same with houses. They appreciate, but do they really? How much of that is, like, a house is a perfect example. You had kind of talked about the other day that, like, the value goes up, but those dollars aren't necessarily worth as much. And then you also have to factor in the depreciation of the house as it kind of breaks down over time.
yeah, absolutely. And like, where else are you going to put your money? Like, we put in the stock market? Sure, we can. But like we talked about, the value of the stock market, and I'm using very rough numbers, so please don't check me on this. But if you look at the stock market gains over the last, I don't know, decade or so, it's somewhere around 15%, would you say? Uh, but what's also the increase in the money supply over the last same time? About that much, right? Average. But where are you going to put it? They try and tell us to put it into our house, as the house being the store of value, but it's a depreciating asset. They try and say put it into stocks, but we can print more stocks. The stocks do stock splits, they issue more, right? There's nothing that like kind of holds value, unlike Bitcoin. So it's like you imagine having a bucket and you're wanting to store your water. A lot of these other things have holes in them, or sometimes they say, well, we're going to give you a different size bucket. Well, Bitcoin is the same bucket. You're storing your energy, your wealth, in a fixed unit, and it can store as much as there is productivity in the world. So that's why Bitcoiners are buying not only on the way up, but also on the way down.
Right, right.
We
So
have that perspective.
So do you think Bitcoin, like, if you were to rank the assets, like, what are truly the assets then? Could buy Bitcoin, could buy farmland. Like, what are your?
Well, farmland is, you can that yields, you can make money off of the farmland, right? Obviously, land, it's hard to make more of, right? And you can also put your crops in there and get a return on that. So farmland, yes, that's a hard asset. I'm not a gold bug anymore, but I can understand why somebody might be interested in gold, just to store wealth. And obviously, there's stocks out there. There's nothing wrong with stocks. I'm not like anti everything else. But what is that? Compound annual growth rate of Bitcoin is still somewhere in between 100 and 150% a year. You know what I mean? So when you look for another asset, well, you got to beat that first, to me. Like, I got a friend telling me that he wants me to invest in his real estate, and he's got a great deal and everything going on. I'm like, well, what's your return? And if it's 20% or something, it's like, that's cool. I'm going to stick with Bitcoin here. I believe it's less risky. And I know that's a weird statement considering it just dipped as hard as it did.
Yeah, big. You bring up I want to talk about gold a little bit because that's
Sure.
interesting too. I mean, at the end of the day, for all intents and purposes, gold and Bitcoin are kind of the same. Gold is something that doesn't serve any purpose. It's not strong. It doesn't. We just decided it's worth X amount of dollars. And then Bitcoin has been called, touted as this digital gold. And that was one of my skepticisms was, obviously gold has stood the test of time here, and there's no reason for it. I don't know if something were to come about and replace it, and kind of the same thing with Bitcoin. It's like right now Bitcoin has a value because people see a value in it and it's scarce. But what happens if something were to replace it? Because one of my skepticisms with crypto as a whole is just that, I mean, we get into the other cryptos, but like just for Bitcoin, it's not like it doesn't produce anything. It's not selling a product. So I had a hard time wrapping my head around, valuing it.
So value is subjective. I think we agree on that, right? So Bitcoin and gold have some similarities, but they also have a lot of differences. If I were to be across the world and want to send you gold, I'd have to hope the people that are transporting the gold are trustworthy. I hope it won't take more than a couple weeks. And imagine how much, if we had a lot of gold between us, how much it would cost to transact that, right? So Bitcoin, I could send you however much I have instantaneously using the Lightning Network. And if I did it on the base layer, it'd take 10 minutes. So 10 minutes, depending on how congested the network is, I could send it to you. I could send $1 million or dollars or whatever for $1, right? Instantaneous, final settlement. No trusted third party, right? So right there, it has benefit over gold. It does the same thing because it's well, not as inflationary as everything else. People say it's the way to say it is disinflationary, right? But what other benefits? Well, let's say you had a couple $1 million in gold and you wanted to store it. Where are you going to store it? Not in your basement. Are you going to store it at a bank? Could the government shut down the bank or confiscate it? Right? You have all that geopolitical concern. Like imagine us being in Ukraine or something with a bunch of gold. I'm not going to try and put it in a suitcase and carry it out of there. Bitcoin, on the other hand, I can store 12 words in my head, walk over a border. All I need is the internet, smartphone. I have access to my funds. So right there, is there value in that? I would say so.
Right. And yeah, you bring up an interesting point when it comes to the third parties. Another quote was Bitcoin eliminates the arbitrage of a bank. It allows people to deal directly, peer to peer, rather than indirectly. And obviously, this intimidates many, but you can't expect people to understand Bitcoin that are hypnotized by fiat money in a way, thinking that fiat is a better option, because most people just don't really understand and take the deep dive into this. But there's obviously a lot of issues that arise with third parties. You mentioned some of them, and or just at the base level here, these banks, and they just continue to print money, and the government continues to print. They're making decisions that probably aren't the best for the average citizen at the end of the day. I like how in your articles you've said to study Bitcoin. You don't say buy Bitcoin, you say you should study Bitcoin. I mean, where should people who are maybe interested, who don't really understand it, where do they start? Like what should they look for?
Right. Well, the reason I say buy or study Bitcoin and not buy it is because I don't know anybody who's been intellectually honest enough and spent enough time, 10, 50, 100 hours studying it, who doesn't just dive right down. Now, I can understand there's a lot of stuff going on in life where you don't have time to watch, 100 hours of YouTube or read a bunch of books or whatever. But once you do, once that light bulb clicks, it's just like, holy shit, it's everything, right? Where do you do that? I mean, right now, I mean, I used to be a huge Twitter fan. It's kind of like in shambles right now in a way, uh, with all the changes and the algorithms and everything. But Bitcoin Twitter, knowing the right people to follow on there, great, just great signal, block out all the noise. But there's so many good podcasts. There's so many great books that I could recommend. I always suggest the Bitcoin Standard by Safety and Moose. Um, that'll give you an understanding of why Bitcoin is that next iteration of money. The Price of Tomorrow by Jeff Booth, understanding why deflation is a good thing, leads to an abundant society as opposed to the inflationary nature that we're in. Tons of, I mean, I could just ramble on with podcasts. You know, I'll listen to a couple podcasts a day. We mentioned Preston Pish. He does the Investor Podcast. He's a Bitcoiner. Peter McCormick. There's just so many good. And the great thing about it is, what interests you about it? Is it the investing side? There's so many podcasts and so much content just on that. Is it the societal benefits? There's so much on that. It's such a wide-ranging topic that you find what you're interested in. Somehow Bitcoin is connected to that because money touches everything, right? The mining aspect. I mean, we could go on that. So cryptography, you know, networking, all of that. There's so many different ways. So what I would suggest is, you know, yourself, aspect of Bitcoin touches that, and that's your in, because, you know, you at least have some background knowledge on one aspect of Bitcoin.
Yeah, definitely a lot of ways to approach it. I mean, Bitcoin is almost this philosophy type thing. Another interesting quote I saw, I forget if this was from your article or not. We are witnessing the dematerialization of the economy, politics, and the rise of the cyber economy and monetary sovereignty through Bitcoin. So you kind of alluded to some things, like what does that look like? How can, you know, Bitcoin help us in that regard?
So I don't know how I want to approach this, but you know, what industry talked shit about the automobile industry? Horse and buggies. um, you know what industry talked shit about, like email when that came around, like the post office. And the reason is they're all improvement previous thing. I believe Bitcoin takes away that need for that third party. It does. It's peer to peer, right? So economically speaking, why do I need a bank? Bitcoin is my bank. I don't need them to hold on to it, and I don't have to trust them. I can just verify. That's another phrase in Bitcoin. Don't trust, verify. So I don't need to worry about the third party risk. And I don't know how much you pay attention to how cozy banks and governments are, but banks have basically become an enforcement arm for the government. All right, I'm not wearing a tinfoil hat here. You know, I mean, you call up and say I want to move $10,000, they're going to say why? That's my money. Why? Why should you care? Right? So with Bitcoin, I don't have to do that. So with its governance, there's less of a need for politics. You know, it just is an improvement on money, and it kind of obsoletes previous forms of money and all of the things, all the trimmings that go along with it.
Yeah, I'm always down to put the tinfoil hats on, but there's no denying that we have given up freedoms. I mean, our freedoms are being eroded in many ways, and I think some people are either would rather feel safe and they're fine with that, and that's, you know, that's a whole other thing. But there's no denying it's happening, and like you mentioned, these banks, they're too big to fail, and everyone, you know, these big corporations and the government, that I think our system worked beautifully when they're all independent, and now what we've seen is they're really not. We've got government, big banks, big media, they're all kind of just doing each other's bidding at this point, and it's just not a healthy way for society and capitalism to function here. And I think that brings up another great, argument for Bitcoin. And I know many have said that, like, they think Bitcoin, you brought up the internet, that Bitcoin will become as ubiquitous in the future as the internet is in our lives today. And obviously, in this world of fiat that we live in, like you mentioned, these rules are not clear. They can be bent, they can be broken to suit whoever's in power, what they're trying to accomplish. Again, whether that is for the greater good, whether they think it's for the greater good. And many times I think we're seeing time and time again, it is not. So Bitcoin could potentially create this independent society. And I know you had written about this interesting idea of helicopter parenting, a modern new phenomenon that I thought was actually really interesting, and definitely bring up some good points here, and how it's actually a result of living in this fiat system. So I'll let you explain this idea a little bit, and maybe where Bitcoin comes in.
Well, and we touched on that earlier a little bit uh, about how when you have a paternal system like that, the haves versus the have-nots, the powerful versus the powerless, it kind of forces that parent-child dynamic, and then that just kind of permeates through society and goes generationally. Um, and then what you have is a group of people who are always expecting something, give me something, right? And that doesn't lead to a positive society. That leads to the parents teaching that to the kids. The kids are always having a sense of entitlement, like, I should expect this, I shouldn't have to work hard for what I want. I, I mean, I could
Creates
go on and on,
a
but
vicious cycle of dependency, right?
it really does. And you
Yeah.
mentioned something earlier about the internet, and it's really just the next iteration of the internet, because the internet, what did the internet do? It unlocked information for everybody, right? Now, instead of having, like, if you go even way farther back, even going back to the printing press, before we had the printing press, right? um where did you get your information? You had to get it from the clergy or the king or whatever. Then, moving forward, we have the printing press. Now you can print books, you can share information that way. You don't have to be this authority up here. That decentralized information, right? And fast forward so many years, the iteration is the internet. Now, literally at your fingertips, we all got information. Anybody can have it. Well, now all that Bitcoin is using the internet to do the same thing with value. Now we can transact value. Just like when we had gold, you could actually hold that and you could transact it. You didn't need somebody at top saying, having the one ledger saying, hey, you have this much. And then when you turn your back or leave the castle, they can erase it and say, nope, they don't have that much.
Yeah.
It's a progression.
Yeah, that you bring up a really good point. Like, all of these things, the printing press, they're perfect examples of new innovations that led to decentralization. Same with the internet. And in the case of the printing press, this is something that was fought by the powers that be and the status quo, because they were trying to preserve. It's almost like, history doesn't repeat itself, but it rhymes here. It's
Yeah.
always the powerful are trying to, they want things to stay the same. They don't want you getting your information elsewhere. So the printing press was a major threat to them. And now, like you said, you could get books and information elsewhere. And I think every time you could probably argue that we had some sort of innovation that led to more decentralization. It had immense benefits for society. So it would make sense that right now we're in that phase where Bitcoin is this new thing, and they're fighting to maintain the status quo, and it could very well be the next internet type of phenomenon.
Right. And like, when you look at politics, I don't even look at left versus right, red versus blue anymore. I see authoritarian versus like a decentralized, top down, bottom up. And once you get up to that top level, you want to hold on to that, like you just said, right? And if you remember back to, I could assume during the printing press years, they were fighting that. If you can, you're probably too young for this, but the internet, were you even born? Can I ask? Were you before the internet?
Yeah. I grew up on dial-up connection. I'm a
There,
90s kid.
there, there you go. There you go. Well, but even then, they were fighting it. They were not wanting it to be just an open protocol like Bitcoin. Imagine that. It's open source. So now nobody has control over it. There's no walled garden. And they tried to fight that tooth and nail back then too. They're doing the same thing today.
Yeah, I think this is a perfect segue. I wanted to kind of get your thoughts on, obviously, this past summer, last few months, we've experienced this implosion in the crypto world with
Yeah.
FTX going under. And, the more I read about this stuff and think about it, it just seems to me that there's got to be something bigger and more sinister at work here. It's almost like an attempt to delegitimize and justify controlling Bitcoin, because I cannot believe that SBF, this soy boy, was able to like figure all this out, criminal mastermind this all on his own in his 20s. Like, there's no way. And obviously, this has now become a justification. First of all, it scared tons of people out of crypto and Bitcoin. I mean, I was not immune to it. I had my crypto and Voyager, and I
Right.
see now clearly I was enticed by the interest they were offering from looking
Right.
at it from an investment standpoint. Now I see why centralization defeats the entire purpose of this. But I just really have a hard time like believing that it was just him. And you see now this guy, arguably just as bad, if not worse, than Madoff, and the billions of dollars that he stole and ruined so many people's lives. It's funny, you don't hear anyone talking about it anymore. The media has quickly
Oh,
forgotten.
on to the next thing. Right.
But just the sheer amount of people who were duped and the big names who supported this. I mean, not too long ago, NBA jerseys had that FTX logo. Tom Brady's doing commercials, Kevin O'Leary's doing commercials. These are not stupid people. And it's just like, how did this happen?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think there's a lot of separate things in there. We got to kind of separate a bunch of that. I think that the Tom Brady's, the Kevin O'Leary's, even I love Steph Curry, man. He's great, but even he got caught up in that. Um, they're not experts on this, and they have people telling them, "Hey, you can make a lot of money off of this." But how tinfoil are we going to get on this? I mean, there's certain connections that you look at and you're just like, that can't be right. He was SBF was very well connected. So okay, so he was well connected. His parents were connected. Mom was a Democratic fundraiser. Dad was MIT and also connected to the SEC. Do I think it was an inside job? I think there was a lot of opportunisticness, if you will. But what did he do? He created his own token, sold it to his own research firm, started front running trades to his people, took the funds that he put to his other firm, pulled them out, and donated them to politicians. He was in the months leading up to the crash. He was seen a lot in Washington, D.C., working with like Gensler, SEC chair, and all the lawmakers, basically writing his own legislation. So, yeah, in a way, they were doing some kingmaking. If it was an inside job, like to pump him up and then tear him down just to kill the industry, if that came out, I wouldn't be surprised. But I don't have that. I don't have that information, so it's pure speculation. What I do know is FTX showed the whole FTX thing showed the reason why Bitcoin, not crypto, because crypto, the word crypto, in terms of how Bitcoiners use it, stands for centralization. It's just a digital fiat. Literally, there's Bitcoin and everything else. Out of those 20,000 other ones, almost all of them have a CEO, have a board, have a marketing firm. Their job, they have pre-mines, like Ethereum, for example, 70% pre-mine. So the Ethereum Foundation mined 70% of the overall supply, held on to it, gave the 30% to the market, right? So anytime that price spikes up, they sold off some, right? That's not fair. That's not fair distribution. Bitcoin is fair distribution. Literally anything else. They might be cool. They might have some really cool ideas and how to smart contracts or NFTs or whatever you want to call, the next thing. They're all the purpose of enriching the owners. So FTX, yeah, it was horrible. Yeah, there might have been some tomfoolery, if you will. But the big picture for me is that's why we don't do that thing. That's why we focus on Bitcoin, because it's a fair protocol that nobody has control over, but everybody has access to. It's permissionless. It's unconfiscatable. It's just fair money. That didn't really
Yeah.
answer your FTX question, but to tie it back to Bitcoin.
No, that's fine. That was all good stuff. And yeah, I feel like the current state of crypto, it's kind of died down now, or Bitcoin. And it kind of, the industry got obviously a bad rap after this meltdown. And I think many are looking at it as nothing more than a gambling casino, international casino. And I mean, where do you think, like, where do we go from here? Where, like, how does Bitcoin regain people's faith?
So I would look to, for example, either El Salvador, it's legal tender there, or look to Africa. So the CFA, the franc, the French currency, they basically have a deal with Central Africa, to where Central Africa gives them all the resources, and the French give them a depreciating franc. It's another situation of the haves taking from the have-nots. It's the redistribution the wrong way, right? So now Bitcoin is one of the fastest adopting continents, and it is because they are being pushed down by the authoritarians. If you, what we need to do is get that kind of message out. Where you see the greatest Bitcoin adoption is where there's the greatest authoritarianism. Half of I heard from a stat from Alex Gladstein, the chief strategy officer of the Human Rights Foundation. Over half the world still lives in an authoritarian regime. Those are the ones that need Bitcoin. I myself, I'm privileged. I still live in a country that is somewhat stable because we're the world reserve currency. So yeah, talking to me about needing Bitcoin, no. Those people need Bitcoin. Argentinians need Bitcoin. I don't know if you saw what happened to Lebanese currency in the last few weeks. Got devalued by 80-90% or something like that, and you see the price of Bitcoin go right up in Lebanon. So those kind of stories need to get out. Switching gears really quickly here, though, what it can do, what the Bitcoin mining can do for the energy grid. So first of all, Bitcoin mining is like already over 50% sustainable. Everybody talks about how it's bad for it's not just sustainable. Look what Texas has done with mining. So when they, if you remember a few years ago, how they had that big storm and they didn't have enough power, Bitcoin mining has now stabilized that grid. And if you want to get into why, we can talk about that on a surface level. I'm not deep into mining, but
Yeah, let's go
they
for it.
basically, okay. So when you have power, if you're running a power station, you have to go to peak capacity. You have to build up this much, but you're hardly ever using that much. So a lot of that energy is wasted, right? So you're going down here, and then a peak comes along, and you got to have just enough to make enough energy to have peak consumption. Bitcoin miners come in, they buy up, they have a contract with the energy grids, they buy up all that excess energy. And they have the contract says, when we say to turn it off, Bitcoin miners can turn off like that. So they're able to build out more capacity, and more capacity means more human flourishing. That's been proven through studies. So Bitcoin miners come in, they buy out, they buy that excess capacity. Now, the energy companies can now build extra power. You're never going to have outages again. and also that drives down prices because they're always buying up the cheapest energy. So that actually there was a article in like Market Insider that's starting to say, hey, Bitcoin mining is actually pretty green. Hey, they have they're more sustainable. They help the energy grid. You're starting to see these articles come out. The thing is, these articles or these stories have been here. It's just that the mainstream isn't pushing out the right articles, right? They're pushing out the FUD, the fear, uncertainty, and doubt. They're saying stuff like in 2017, they said, Bitcoin mining is on track to consume all of the world's energy by 2020. Not even close, not even a fraction of a percent. And what we're doing is buying up the wasted energy. So there's stories for humanitarian issues. There's stories for just grid stability. There's the inflation issue. There's so many areas in which Bitcoin has value that people don't talk about, and that's kind of the stuff that I try and focus on.
Yeah, I know all too well what it's like dealing with the FUD as a Tesla investor, but lots of really interesting stuff. And I'm gonna have to probably take the deep dive now into this Bitcoin rabbit hole because I am interested again. I'm curious, what do you use to store your Bitcoin?
I've got it kind of stored away in a couple different ways. I use hard wallets. I have a cold card that's a Bitcoin only. Looks like a little calculator. I also have a ledger, so I split it up that way in different geolocations, just security. And I also have, Wasabi wallet on my desktop so that I send stuff to there. It does coin join by default, so therefore it breaks the chain of so companies can't like track where all the funds go from because they're just it's the surveillance state. It breaks that somewhat. But I used to be the guy with the funds on BlockFi, trying to earn interest. And because I was in inside the ecosystem, Bitcoin, Twitter, started to hear rumblings of like this company or that company going under or whatever, I was able to kind of pull it back to my hardware device, my signing device. So I don't see going back to earning interest because, like you said earlier, it puts it back into centralization control, right? The whole purpose of it is decentralized peer-to-peer money.
Right. And are you all in on Bitcoin? How do you divvy out your investing?
I probably put in 15% of my net worth, and it's currently at maybe 30. Probably put in close to 20 and up to 30, even after this big dip, because I've started buying pretty aggressively at middle of 2018. But I bought all the way up to 50. I bought all the way back down. That last little bit when it was in the a few months ago when it was in that 17 to 18 range, I was buying there too. But I still have farmland. I still have a 401k. Or a Roth IRA, that is. I'm sorry. So I'm not 100% yet, but the word "yet's" in there. I do believe, I don't know, this decade, 3 decades from now, I do believe that it's going to be that unit of account that we're going to start pricing things in Bitcoin, and that's when everything flips. It doesn't matter what the price of Bitcoin is per se, because as we've mentioned before, fiat's going to keep inflating away, right? So why hold on to that? I kind of think of Bitcoin as my savings account, so to speak.
Yeah, I think this has been one of the major positives of the internet is that all of this stuff is coming to the forefront and all the information is much more accessible. And I think people are starting to wake up. They're getting an inkling of, what's really going on. I forget who it was with the quote of if the American people understood the banking system, they would have a revolution tomorrow. So I
Right.
think I could see it being only a matter of time. Again, I think people are definitely waking up to these things. So I think that's a perfect note to close on. Where can people find you?
I'm on Twitter at Tim_Neimeyer_, aka Timmy Sats. got a Facebook group. I got a website. I'm on Noster now, but mainly Twitter is where I hang out.
And you write for Bitcoin Magazine too, as well, right?
Yeah, got
I'll
a few
uh,
articles there.
I'll
Yeah,
link to all those in the description below. And well, thank you for coming on here. This is a lot of fun, and I got some more homework to do, I think, on Bitcoin.
thank you, man. I really appreciate it. Stay in touch.
Definitely. See you guys.